Welcome to the Troy Hayner Cultural Center. We are here to walk through the Christmas exhibit. It's called Celestial Christmas. We'll be going through the 17 quilts on display, as well as showing you some of the rooms that are decorated for the Christmas holiday. We're coming to you right now from the parlor and the second floor overlooking Main Street. This would make a really great studio for quilting, by the way. I'm fairly certain my long arm machine would fit right here in front of the windows. And with this beautiful fireplace and Christmas tree, who wouldn't want to spend some time here? We are in the gallery on the second floor, and I'm just going to pan around the room to show you some of the quilts on display here before I talk about quite a few of those. Tell you kind of how I got started on this process. A lot of people ask me how I got started in quilting, and it started back in 1990. I was working at a bar in Miami, Florida, and one of our customers came in and told me that he was taking classes in quilting. And I thought that was unusual for two things. One, I thought it was unusual that a man was taking quilting classes. And two, I thought it was unusual that there were teaching quilting classes in Miami, Florida, when there wasn't a high need for quilts. It's not like it gets really cold there. So I was talking to my mom about these classes, and she had said that she had always wanted to learn. So I told her if she would go to the class, I would go with her. So we went to the store and we signed up, but there was a 6-month waiting list to get into this 6-week class. It was sold out, both the morning and evening classes, for 6 months. So we signed up and started collecting fabric until we finally got into the class. My mom got into about the 3rd class, but she was just so wrapped up with raising the grandkids that she just felt overwhelmed and she dropped out. But at that point, I was hooked. So I have been quilting ever since then, right around 1990. Mostly traditional quilts, log cabin quilts, star quilts, things that you would expect an actual quilt to look like, something that goes on a bed. It's only been in the last 10 years or so that I ventured into doing what I would consider art kind of quilts, wall quilts. This particular quilt is called A Gathering of Angels. It's an actual pattern by a designer called Maggie Walker. Maggie Walker did several of these block of the months quilts. She did roosters, cats, foxes, Roseville pottery. There was a whole series of these quilts. And I was very drawn to these angels. I've always liked angels ever since I was young, and I have them all over my house. So I was teaching this class, and it took me several years to actually finish. It wasn't until probably around 2015 that I actually got my piece finished and sent off to a quilter. This particular quilt was quilted by Jamie Wallen in Michigan City, Indiana. After I finished the quilt, I was really happy with the way it looked, and I enjoyed how I felt working on it. So I was looking for a similar project that would have angels in it, and commercially there was nothing available. Everything that had an angel in it was more of a primitive or simplistic design, and I wanted something a little more realistic, something a little more sophisticated. So that set me on a search for other angel images, and that's how I got started in working with original pieces. As a side note, I will say that these two quilts, Stellar Event, there's a black version and a gray, were the first two quilts that I worked on that utilized silk fabric. I had collected some fat quarter tins of silk du peony at one of the nation's largest quilt markets, and I held on to them for several years until I finally decided I wanted to work on this. I saw this pattern that was a foundation piece pattern, but I knew how to do strip piecing, so I just went ahead and drafted it out myself. I utilized all the different silk, and you can see it goes in color series: gold, red, purple, teal, green, cream. And these wedges are just reversed for the opposite side. So the gold's in the center here, it's in the outer tips there. But because I wanted to use so many colors of silk, I made enough strips that I could make 2 quilts. So that's why there's a gray version and a black version. After I did those, then I felt confident enough to start working with silk, doing applique. I found the image of this particular icon in a church. I found the image on on Pinterest. And I've never actually seen the image in person. It was just a Pinterest image that I saw. And I really liked the angels in it. And this was probably a big chew on my first try. But I used an art projector, and I enlarged the photo using an art projector to be able to trace off the image. The problem with the art projector was the larger I made the image, the thicker the lines became, and so it became very hard to get some of the pieces for the applique, and also the faces were almost impossible. I tried to do hand-drawn faces for 2 different tries, and I just didn't have the skill level yet for that particular process. So these are just photo transfer images on fabric. This particular quilt has some interesting sacred geometry symbols in it. We have the circle that is the areola halo. We have the square that's represented by the arms of the 4 angels. And we also have a diamond from the wingspan. So it has the diamond, the square, and the circle in it. The bodies are all done in batik, and the robes in silk du peony, and Christ is all in silk du peony. When I started, I had enough of this particular fabric that was quite old, probably 15 years old, to do about one side of this. And that's when I realized how I wanted to applique this border onto the quilt. I tried very hard to find more fabric online, but generally fabric's only printed once. So nobody had this fabric left anymore. So I was able to track down the original designer of that fabric, Peggy O'Toole from Robert Kaufman, and I contacted her, and she had 3.5 yards of the fabric, which was enough for me to finish the quilt. So I purchased that from her, and I always intended to send her a photo when the quilt was finished. When I did get it complete, just the top, it hadn't been quilted yet, I went ahead and tried to contact her, but the email address was no longer valid. So I later found out that she had passed away just a month after sending me this fabric. So without Peggy's help, I would not have been able to realize this quilt the way I had envisioned. This also is another quilt that was quilted by Jamie Wallen in Michigan City, Indiana, and he did a beautiful job in quilting it. It has a little bit of Swarovski crystals in the border just to give it a little bit of sparkle. These 2 quilts are patterns by Jacqueline de Jong. We have Chasing Dreams and Summertime. The quilt on the left was quilted by Corey Ralph in Alberta, Canada, and we entered it into a competition and won Best Group Quilt. The one on the right, I quilted using a digital quilting pattern, and it also has an SVG file from a design from Urban Elements. The name of the quilting pattern and that SVG file are both called Tapestry, and those are available on the Urban Elements website. Both of these dark quilts were free motion quilted and some ruler work, and those I did practicing free motion quilting myself. I think I like the quilting on the gray version a little bit better than the black. This was about the third quilt that I did in creating patterns myself from icons. This particular icon came from a church in Kiev, Ukraine. The name of the church is St. Vladimir's Cathedral, and the artist that painted this original icon was Wilhelm Kordobinsky. It turns out that I was very fond of his work because I did several pieces based on his icons and from the same church. So these were all from Kiev, Ukraine, and originally I was going to call the whole thing Angels Over Kiev. This particular one was part of a larger component. It had a large square with 4 angels, one in each corner, and a huge cross in the center. So this only represents one of the 4 angels, and you can see the big aerial halo again. We see the large circle that the angel's a part of. This was all hand-dyed fabric, and these were batik. And again, the angel is all in silk du peony. The braid is from a vintage sari from India. I found those at a booth at QuiltCon one year, and the vendor was explaining that the people don't traditionally value the Indian vintage textiles, so they would burn off the silk to regain the metal in the trim on the sari. I liked it because you could see that it creates, the gold actually has a patina to it, and it gave an aged feel. Another thing I will say, that the fabric I chose is mostly solids, and that is so that your mind is not pulled out by people who know different fabrics like Kay Fawcett or Robin Pandoff or Jenny Beyer. They're not pulled out of the icon or the image. They're able to just meditate and reflect on the image itself. And this is one of the first times that you'll see that I actually painted the hands and the face myself and the hair, and that is using Sukaniko all-purpose ink, and very simplistic. This again is another example of a Wilhelm Kordobinsky icon. It appeared in the St. Vladimir's Cathedral. This one is using a batik background, inked Sukaniko ink on the face, and again silk du peony on the wings. You can see I was trying to imitate the shading that was in the actual painting, and on here I have a variety of ink, airbrush, and different techniques trying to replicate that ombre look from the yellow to the blue. Also, the wings both tuck behind and above the border, and again I've used the silk sari as the trim for this. I did all the free motion quilting, and it's all hand applique. We have 5 quilts in the main hall upstairs. Archangel, Elijah in the Desert, Allegory of Renown, the Annunciation, and at the end, a king is born. This particular location had an emergency box that had to be accommodated during the exhibit, so I actually measured the space available and made the quilt to fit this space. This particular quilt was from one of the arches in the St. Vladimir's Cathedral. It had 5 seraphim entangled in the arch. The church is absolutely beautiful. According to the images, every area is encrusted with paintings and icons. This particular one was on the far left. The quilt uses hand applique. Again, some of the silk du peony was hand dyed. We have all-purpose ink on the face with a little bit of embroidery. Foundation piecing in some of the small piecing here and here on those 2 bands, and then hand applique in the top and bottom. If you'll notice, the value on this center starts light and works out to the dark in both the top and bottom piece, and all of those colors are repeated in the wings of the angel. This particular one I called Archangel, even though Archangel would only have 2 wings. It was really just a play on words because it was from the arch. Arch and ark are both spelled the same. This particular piece is called Elijah in the Desert, and I saw a detail of this just as a plane was about to depart for Denver, Colorado, and I lost Wi-Fi. So I was very anxious to get to land to be able to get the image again. Originally it had Elijah and the wilderness background, but it was all more than I could actually translate. A lot of ink work on the basically nude Elijah. So I opted for just the angel, and again we have the ink in the hands, arms, and feet. All silk du peony here in the background, and this is silk organza that I pleated and left dimensional to give the dress a look of flow. The piece was originally painted by Frederick Leighton in 1877, and this is my interpretation of that piece. This particular piece is called Allegory of Renown. It is by a sculptor called Marius Jean-Antoine Mercier. It was created in 1878. The image that I saw of this was a black and white GIF, so I had to attribute colors to the piece. It's silk du peony, except for the cotton for the arms and face. And this time it's a metallic silk organza that I even increased the dimensionality of the organza to give it a very fluid feel. Free motion quilting in the background. Modern art quilters often use matchstick quilting in the background, which is 1/4 inch straight lines. I wasn't able to maintain those, so I started to do a little bit more of a curve. I interpret this as a heartbeat, as a thumbprint, as the rings of a tree, as the thumbprint of God. So I see a lot of different things as I'm quilting the background, which helps keep my mind occupied through the long process of quilting that. I also try and quilt very lightly on the face. Quilting causes fabric to recede, and I don't want to recede parts of the face that wouldn't actually be receded, like the chin, the nose, the arm. I want it to puff out, not recede in, so I don't quilt really heavily on these pieces. This particular quilt is called the Annunciation. There are hundreds of variations of this quilt on the internet. It's a very popular icon. At this point, I will tell you that almost all of these are taken from either Greek Orthodox or Roman Orthodox icons. This particular one I've seen mirror imaged both left and right. I've seen various backgrounds, various color dresses. This was just one of the ones I felt was most dramatic with the black background, but I probably would not use black again. Black is a symbol of death in iconography. Even though we could spin it and say it foretold the crucifixion of Christ, because the Annunciation is the announcement of Christ's birth to Mary. On the left-hand side, we have a band of the vintage silk sari, and on the right side, we have a digital quilting design called Feather Flurry. That was created by Jamie Wallen and Patricia Ritter. That also is commercially available, and that's double stitched. Your background is in gold isocord, and then the top quilting is ombre metallic by Superior Thread. We also have a dimensional breastplate. This breastplate illustrates the 12 tribes of Israel, and we have gold metallic thread extending out in the halo, and where the Holy Spirit is touching the angel's hand. We've come to the end of the hallway. This particular piece is very large. It's the largest piece in the exhibit. It's called A King is Born, and it celebrates the birth of Christ in the manger. I was the one that assembled this little grouping of icons. The icons came from different churches. One of them was in Denver. Again, they are silk dupioni. The faces are all hand inked, as well as the hands and feet. And the background of each of the blocks is a batik. This quilt has a similar layout and the exact same fabric on the inner borders and the sashing as A Gathering of Angels that we started off the exhibit with. It is what I tried to replicate the image of that when I was designing this particular piece. This piece also has Swarovski crystals that are attached to some of the border fabrics, and there is examples of free motion quilting and ruler work in this piece. And it was actually the very last piece that was finished for the show. The binding on this actually got finished just the week before the installation. And I will say that Marguerite Berry did several of the bindings in the exhibit to help me get everything up to speed. So without her, I wouldn't have all these quilts hanging. We're stepping into one of the conference rooms, and this particular room was decorated with an abundance of sunflowers to celebrate the celestial Christmas theme. So we'll just give you a quick pan around the room to give you an idea of what festive decor is illustrated here. This is the boardroom that was also decorated for the holidays, and through the door in the back you can see the parlor that we started the tour off at and the Christmas tree. We are in the West Room, which was decorated by the Miami County Herb Society. And you can see there's some beautiful angels decorating the room. This is one of the first actual quilts of the exhibit. This is probably the oldest one in the show. It was created in 2002. It's called Fragile Angel. It is an example of a stained glass quilt where bias tape is utilized to create the effect of a stained glass window. This was actually from a pattern. It may have been called Fragile Angel. I don't have the information on that quilt pattern at the moment. This quilt is called Behold. This is another example of a stained glass quilt, but it does not use bias tape. Rather, it uses a solid black background and the pieces are created over top of it. It has ink work on the face and applique and the body and wings. This one is called Behold. Trying to find an angle that would not have glare in it, and this is about as best that I can get. This particular image also was taken from St. Vladimir's Cathedral in Kiev, Ukraine. This is seraphim that was in the second floor stairwell. You can see a little bit of the arch of the curved ceiling in the upper right-hand corner. Face again inked by Sukaniko all-purpose ink. This is probably the first quilt that I made after the Ascension quilt, the first one in the Kiev series, and the painted elements were all done by Applique. The face again, Sukaniko all-purpose ink, and that border trim is another piece of vintage sari from approximately 1930s, 1940s. So that's pretty much the essence of this piece. One of the things I would say about the process in choosing fabric is I was trying to use a lot of silk because it isn't dated in our mind the way a specific designer like Kay Fawcett or Jenny Beyer, Robin Pandolf, we don't associate a certain time period with it, so I wanted the angels to have an ethereal feel to them, so you get trapped in the icon rather than in the materials used to create the quilt. This is probably the smallest piece in the exhibit, and I'm going to probably finish with the quilts here. This is also from the Kiev, Ukraine chapel. It's very much the same as one of the quilts upstairs. It's just a much smaller version. Silk du peony, ink on the face, and a little bit of metallic organza in the back of the halo. This one started because of the frame, actually. I found this vintage frame at a local garage sale for like $5, and I held on to the frame for several years trying to figure out what I might do with it. And I thought a little framed angel would be the perfect use of this vintage frame. Originally I thought I might paint the frame, but rather than doing that, I just found the color complement to the frame itself and then incorporated some of the color of the frame into the wings of the angel. So that will be the last of the quilts, but I do have another room and entry to show you on the Christmas decorations. We started up in the parlor, and now we're ending in the downstairs study. I want to thank you for taking a tour with me around the Hayner, looking at some of the quilts on display as well as the Christmas decorations. We wanted to do this for those of you who couldn't make it in to see the actual exhibit and to share some of that holiday joy with you. So we want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday, and looking forward to a bright new year.